Hello, thank you guys for coming for this very special recording of Learn from People Who Lived It podcast. We're grateful that you're here tonight, and we're grateful to have our host, Mr. Mathew Blades. Like I said last night, ever since learning about New Freedom, he has been a fierce advocate and has dreamt of doing his podcast here. So we're really grateful to have him, and please give it up for Mr. Mathew Blades.
Give it up. Well, I'm happy that you're here. I love a big crowd. I love a small crowd. I think they both have their absolute pluses, and so I'm excited to see what happens tonight. As Megan mentioned, I'll give you guys the quick version of the story. 3 months ago was the breakfast for New Freedom Project, and I went in and I toured the facility, and I was sitting in the crowd eating too much bacon, and just watching Tracy and the entire crew up on the stage, and everything they were saying was just so magnetic, and I felt like, wow, this is a really incredible place. And while I was sitting there, I had this vision of like, you got to bring your podcast to this place. And thankfully, Megan didn't think I was crazy when I called her and I said, hey, look, you don't know me, but I was in the crowd. I had a vision. Here's what I think I want to do. And she was great, thankfully, all about it. And so that's how we got to this place here tonight. Learn from People Who Lived It does go to, I tell people we get in the weeds a little bit, right? Like, we're not here to talk about fantasy football and what the latest songs and movies are out there. We're going to go places tonight that might be tough for people to go. But, so in that spirit, if there's something that happens tonight, you need to get up, you need to move around or whatever, I just want you to know that you can, okay? So just don't feel like you have to stick around. If something's really agitating you, just do what you need to do to feel comfortable in this space. I want to introduce my partner here, and then we're going to introduce our guest in just a couple of moments. On the podcast, Learn from People Who Lived It, it has this backdrop of therapy. It has this backdrop of life coaching, of how do I make the worst thing that ever happened to me the best thing that ever happened to me. And there's nobody better at that than this guy right here, who is Dr. David Lycan. He is a psychiatrist. He's board certified in psychiatry. He specializes in PTSD. He's worked with veterans most of his adult life. And the other thing that you're so good at, Dave, is identifying patterns. So tell us a little bit about you, what you feel like sharing, and then just maybe expand on that idea of the patterns.
Well, Matthew, it's a pleasure to be here as always. So as Matthew said, I've been a psychiatrist now for, about 28 years. I worked with veterans for about 24 years, specializing mostly in post-traumatic stress, but also other things like depression and bipolar and addiction issues as well. In the last few years, my focus has kind of shifted more toward reaching out to people through podcasts, and instead of working one-on-one with people, kind of going back to basics and taking difficult concepts that people hear about and don't really understand and try to bring it down to a level that's just easy to understand and digest. I kind of feel like in psychiatry, there's a lot of things that people hear about and they really don't know, what exactly it is, and I want to make all that more accessible for people. So that's kind of my focus these days. And certainly looking for patterns, helping people identify patterns. Something I'm fond of saying is if you can identify a pattern, you can predict the future. So many things that we live through and go through day to day, they just kind of happen automatically. You do things, maybe situations happen, conflicts with people that you care about, and you wonder, like, how did I end up here again, right? Because a lot of times we do things kind of on autopilot. And so if you can take a step back from it and kind of see how things unfold and be able to recognize that pattern, then the next time it comes around, you have a chance of maybe taking a different route or finding an exit ramp.
Snapping it. Yeah, absolutely. Well, our guest tonight is, we just had our first Zoom session on Monday, and I got to know a little bit about her. I know that the people that are in this room probably know more about her than I do, and I'm excited to hear about her story. Lindsay described herself as somebody who grew up in a normal house. That's how she put that. She's been sober for 7 years now, and we're going to find out, I think, where her patterns came from this evening as we jump into this. Welcome, guys. Come on in and grab a seat. We are just getting started, so you're in perfect timing. She serves as the transitional services manager here at NFP, and I asked her, I said, what does that mean? She says, well, I do a lot of things, but mostly I help people get their paperwork in order. So I'm excited to bring her on, and if y'all will just join me in welcoming Lindsay Proulx to the podcast. Have a seat. That's your hot mic right there.
All right.
If that mic's too far away from your mouth, just bring it a little bit closer so we can hear you. Perfect.
Try not to break it.
How are you?
I'm good.
Are you ready for all
Fantastic.
this?
I am.
Okay. First time on a podcast, or have you done several?
First time on a podcast, yeah.
Okay.
It's just a conversation.
Well, like I said, I'm really happy that you're with us tonight. I'm excited that we're going to jump in and do this whole thing. So if you guys are okay with it, we are going to begin. Yeah? All right. No objections. Here we go.
Find and learn from people who lived it wherever you get podcasts. Search it using all one word. Learn from people who lived it.
Welcome to another episode of Learn from People Who Lived It.
Well, welcome to, I think, what's going to be a special evening here. We're at New Freedom Project one more time. Last night, we were visiting with the male population. Tonight, we're visiting with the female population. And as a result, we're going to switch out our guests. Cordero Holmes joined us last night, and tonight, it's going to be a woman named Lindsay Proulx. We'll meet her in just 1 second. I'm glad everybody's here. Dr. Dave, thank you for being on the podcast one more time.
Matthew, it's a pleasure as always to be here.
So our next guest, I met her on Monday, and she said that, she grew up in a normal house. And by normal, I think she means that her dad was an alcoholic. She lost him way too soon. Her mom was an addict. She became an addict. She ended up in rehab. She ended up in jail. There's a whole bunch of stuff that I think that I'm excited to kind of uncover with you. But where I'm most excited to get into tonight is your turning points. And, this is what Dave and I are so focused on this particular podcast. We all experience hardship. We all experience very difficult things. But what I'm interested in is, how did you cycle out of it? What were the wins that you needed to put together to get yourself there? So before we get to that, talk to me about this normal house that you grew up in.
So I grew up in what I would call normal, right? Because that was normal for me. Functioning alcoholic father, a mom who was one of those PTA moms. She went to all of our school things, all of our is it PTA? PTO? PTA?
Yeah, both.
She was a great mom. She packed snacks. We had lunches. She cooked dinner every night, hard worker. At the age of 12, my father had passed away in a work accident.
Oh, man.
When he had passed away, my mom became broken, super broken. She turned to drugs and alcohol.
Wow. Yeah, as I said last night, and it's worth saying in every setting that I'm in, I believe most of us experience that duality growing up. We have parents who really try their hardest, but sometimes they are themselves feeling a little out of sorts and broken. And none of us are in therapy because we got too many hugs, right? Because so you can have the bad stuff, you can have the good stuff, and but it's the bad stuff that leaves the mark on us. And certainly, I'll start right there with losing your dad at 12 years old. I lost my dad at 23 years old, and that had a massive impact on me. What did that do for you, losing your dad at 12?
So I have two older brothers, and it was really hard, I think, seeing them lose their father more than it was for me.
Really?
Yeah, which is kind of ironic to say. My father was a big part of their lives. He was their Little League coach, their Pop Warner coach. He was really involved, and they're older than me. So it was really hard on them. So they became very angry. They became very disruptive in the house, to where my mom couldn't manage them anymore.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And then your mom, you said she just kind of fell apart. It was just really tough for her. You mentioned on our call on Monday that she became a heroin addict. How did that all come to be?
I'm not sure how that became to be in the household. You know, at the age of 12, you know something's going on in the home. You don't really know what's going on, but I vividly remember looking back and her being in the bathroom for hours and hours, and my brothers out being dysfunctional kids out in the streets, you know, and it's just me, just a 12-year-old girl, just trying to figure out how I'm gonna eat for the night, you know, knocking on the bathroom door, asking mom, hey, are you gonna make dinner? And she's slipping me money under the door, order pizza, kind of thing, you know, put myself to bed, walking myself to school.
What's interesting about that, and Dave, I want to get your take on this right away, is that sort of sets up a belief system in you, right? And it does. It separates it for all of us. And put yourself in her shoes. It sets up this operating system, and now you have a certain way that you live your life, and you have a certain belief about the way life looks and is, and that starts to become the way you live day in and day out.
I think what strikes me too is that at 12 years old, you're still very dependent on your parents. You know, an older teenager, I mean, certainly you're going to grieve, but you have more skills and you're more physically developed to be able to kind of take care of yourself a little bit more. So at 12, you're still very much on your own. So that must have been especially hard.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very hard. Yeah.
What kinds of, now hindsight's 2020, you can look back on it, and I might be getting ahead of us, and so we might go back and forth here a little bit, play some ping pong. But what were some of those beliefs that you had to unravel in your healing process or set down in your healing process?
I think some of the beliefs for me was the anger and the resentments. You know, I was so full of that anger that I had towards my mom, you know, for not being there when I was such a young child. Anger towards my siblings for leaving me alone.
Was that something that developed early on or as you got more into your teen years?
I would say probably about 16, yeah.
So between 12 and 16, you're just in survival mode, just trying to get through it.
Yep.
Did it have any impact on your sexuality or the way that you behaved outside of the house, or, you know, because sometimes these things happen and people have a tendency to turn towards things. Did you start smoking? Did you start, you know, hooking up with boys? Did you start looking for other pieces of validation or comfort or security?
Yeah, I was trying to find acceptance in my identity. You know, I was trying to find my identity in smoking cigarettes. I was trying to find my identity in boys, in different groups of crowds. You know, do I want to hang out with these people? Do I want to hang out with these people? You know, and I'm just searching and searching for who am I?
And there's nobody to tell you no.
There's nobody to tell me no. Yeah.
When did you told me on Monday that you became an addict yourself. Let's jump into that piece of your life. So when does this start?
I would say my addiction probably started my early 20s, but I was experiencing drugs and alcohol at the early age of 16. So I was already drinking alcohol, doing other drugs, smoking cigarettes, skipping school.
Like just weed, or what were you into?
Cocaine, ecstasy, alcohol, marijuana.
All the things.
All the things, yeah.
How long did that addiction last in your life?
Till I was 32, so about 15, 16 years. Yeah.
Do you think, because this is what I believe to be true about me, I grew up with a functioning alcoholic father, and I became an alcoholic myself in my 20s and my 30s, and he, in a way, he kind of taught me how to do it. And I watched him, and I was like, okay, this is what he does. This is how he handles things. And you know, my dad was around. He wasn't like down in the basement, passed out, kind of an alcoholic. He was a functional alcoholic, so he was around a lot. But he taught me how to do it. Do you feel like your mom taught you how to do it?
Yeah, she did in a way, you know, and I don't think she knew better, you know, because she was an addict herself. But about 18 years old, I started using with her. So we used for a long portion of my addiction together.
Interesting. Tell me about the first time you guys made the choice to do that together.
The first time I think it started off with prescription medications. So I remember I had gotten some wisdom teeth pulled out, and gotten prescribed to some prescription medications. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, this is nice, you know? So my mom had taken them with me as well. And then when those prescription medications ran out, my mom was like, well, are you still in pain? This might help as well. And I don't think she realized that at that time that she was contributing to something that had already started. I think she was like, oh, you're in pain, and I'm saying yes. And she's giving me prescription medication.
Do you think that you said yes because you were in pain or because you wanted to, that's the answer you knew
I
she
wanted to be numb.
Yeah, you wanted to be numb.
I'm kind of curious, how did that change your relationship with your mom at that point? Like, was it still anger, or did you kind of bond around that in a way?
A little bit of both. I would say a little bit of both. We bonded on an addiction aspect of it, but there was still a lot of anger there.
Yeah, I've interviewed, hundreds of people, and you're the first person that I think I've interviewed that, started using with your parents. And it is such an interesting dynamic when you really think about it. And I could see, that's how, I'm happy you asked that question, because it's like, you can see where it would be both.
Yeah.
In some ways, you guys would, you get under the influence and maybe you'd have some really good conversations and you guys would get close. Were you angry with your mom?
Yeah. I was angry with my mom. I was also angry with a lot of things. I think I was angry at the world at that age, not just her, but angry at everything. I was full of anger.
What do you think you were pissed about?
Fear. I think fear, being pissed about fear. I think being upset about losing my dad, my brothers leaving because they ended up moving out of the household.
They did.
Probably things with my at-school life, kids not accepting me, those types of things, yeah.
Did you have a little stability in your childhood, like between 12 and 16? I'm gonna kind of working backwards a little bit. Were you at the same school, the same friends? Like after your dad died, did your environment change at all?
Oh yeah, yeah. We moved. I would say at least once a year. We moved.
Really?
So I was different high schools, different grade schools. We were never stable in one place.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Because I was kind of wondering if there was maybe a family that, knowing your situation, kind of stepped up and tried to offer some support.
Yeah.
But if you're moving a lot and you're starting over new, the high school cliques are already established, and it's very hard to get plugged in.
Yeah.
So let's just jump in and out. So you're in your addiction, and you're in this addiction for a decade plus, sounds like. It starts with heroin, or does it start with the booze and the other things you were talking about?
It starts with alcohol and marijuana and cocaine, and then it gradually goes from prescription medications to heroin to methamphetamine to, fentanyl.
Pardon my question, but I just don't know. Where did you get this stuff as a young person?
Streets.
Really?
My family.
Okay.
My mom. Friends that you make that you think are your friends. The circle, school.
Interesting. Yeah. I want you to talk a little bit, Dave, about addiction, just based on what you know, and just why does it grip us so tightly? Like, why is that such a thing that so many of us struggle with?
There's a couple of different aspects to it. First of all, there can be a genetic component. So if you already have family members that are struggling with addiction, that's already one strike against you, that if you're going to start using alcohol, that you have more of a chance of it becoming problematic than if you don't have the family connection to it. But I think you had touched on something earlier too about having so much unprocessed trauma and not knowing what to do with that pain, trying to find some way of numbing it down or at least making the emotional pain bearable, I think certainly becomes a hook that makes turning to substances appealing and useful in a way, but it ends up obviously turning bad as you become hooked on it. And then there's also the physical addiction part. So when you start using, obviously the first time you use, it's a choice, right? And what ends up happening is your reward cycle in the brain gets hijacked. So instead of being able to look forward to something and do the thing and enjoy it, and you get a little dopamine bump, pursuing the drug starts taking over and driving your behavior, even when there's no reward at the end of it, right? And so then that compulsive behavior starts to take over to the point where it's hard to even do anything. Like voluntary choice to not do it is almost impossible to override the situation.
Let me ask you a question. So Dave has said this 1,000 times on my podcast, Learn from People Who Lived It. He said about alcohol, he says it turns off the part of the brain that cares. And so you wonder why people can get themselves to a point in their life where they live under a bridge, or they live on the streets, or they subject themselves to really dangerous situations. And alcohol turns off the part of the brain that cares. Do other drugs do the same thing?
Alcohol's unique in that way.
It is.
But all of them have the same effect of, it starts out as the normal reward cycle, but then it just becomes compulsive, and then the payoff at the end just isn't there anymore. I mean, I've talked to people that have used cocaine, and the first time they used it, the high was so amazing, and every time after that, they were trying to get that same high again, and it never happened. And then, you think maybe, and, after a while, like I said, it becomes habitual behavior, and being able to control it or rein it in just isn't possible anymore.
Did you ever put yourself in a really dangerous situation while you were using?
Oh, yeah. All kinds of dangerous situations.
Anything you mind sharing?
So I can give you one dangerous situation leading up to right when I got arrested. So
You're about 25 years old.
I was about 25 years old, and me and another person decided to steal a flatbed trailer from some random person. Well, as we were stealing it, the people who owned the home came outside, and they called the cops. So we were on a high-speed chase with the cops. The trailer had came off the truck, and I'm running from the police, lose my shoes, hop in fences, all of the above, getting chased by police helicopters. And booked to jail.
Was that the moment that took you to county jail?
One of the moments, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Let's talk about that. Let's jump into it, because obviously the backdrop here of New Freedom Project is this is a great institution for people who have been formerly incarcerated to come in and work through the steps in the program to get a different life for themselves. Yeah. Tell us about the first time you went to jail.
So that was the first time I went to jail.
Were you terrified?
Oh, I was so terrified. I was terrified, and I was sick, right? I'm going through withdrawals, so sick, and it's so cold, and I'm in shorts and a tank top with no shoes, and I'm freezing, and it's horrible. You're in a room full of 25 women who are all pretty much going through the same thing you are. Some aren't. But yeah, it's an awful feeling. You're terrified. You don't know who to call. You don't know who to talk to. You don't know who to trust. You don't know if you should cry.
Or be tough.
Yeah.
Right. Who did you call?
I believe I called my mom. Yep.
Just for my own reference, is your mom still around?
She is, yeah.
What's your relationship like with her now?
It's good. We're still working on it. She is sober now,
Okay.
so that's fantastic. Yeah.
And you
Yeah.
are too? That helps.
And I am too, yeah. Still a work in progress. I think, I have much more sobriety than she does, and she still tends sometimes to go back to her addiction. So it's kind of a healing process and setting boundaries with her.
Okay. Back to prison. So you're in. It's your first night there. What's your first night like in jail?
First night in jail, I threw up all night, super sick. I was miserable. I couldn't sleep. I cried once I got into a bed. We're moved from different cell to different cell to different cell until you finally get where they're going to keep you there. Had nightmares, a lot of nightmares, a lot of, what do you call them, night terrors, and it was horrible.
Do you think
absolutely
that
horrible.
that's the case? And I'm just looking out at this group right now. Is that the case for most people? That first night in jail is just terrifying. You know, you've been on some substance and now you're not on some substance, and it's just like, holy shit, reality is here, and like, wow, like this is where I'm at this stage of the game. How long was the stint in prison from that incident?
So I was in jail for about 30 days. I was released out on bond. And when I got out on bond, I decided to continue going back to what I was doing before. You know, so I went back to drugs and alcohol.
Right away?
Right away.
Okay.
Yeah, probably the day I got out. And before you know it, I'm right back in jail with new charges, out on bond. Now I'm not bondable, and I'm back in there again in about, I think it was like 60 days. I'm back in jail.
And then how long was that particular stay?
That particular stay in county jail was about 90 days. And then after that, I was sentenced to Department of Corrections, and I went to prison.
For how long?
For a year and a half.
Okay. So 90 days is long enough to kind of work through the cycle of like the withdrawal symptoms, right? And so at the end of the 90 days, are you miserable, or are you feeling like, okay, my body's starting to come back together a little bit?
I think after about the 90 days, yeah. But I think at some point between the 30 to 90 days that I was there, I kind of had a like acceptance. You know, I'm not going to get out, you know, and this is kind of what my reality has to be. So either I accept it or I live in my misery. And I didn't want to live in misery, so acceptance is what I did.
What do you think that did to you? Like this, I mean, did you take on an identity? Because that's what, you know, I think is so challenging about trauma, is that we can take on this identity and it becomes who we are. Like, I am this. And then, you know, because the brain, thanks to Dave, we know this, the brain believes what you tell it. And so if you're sitting there and you're going, I'm an addict, or I'm somebody who gets in trouble with the law, like, those things will happen again. They'll find a way for it to happen again. Did you take on an identity of, this is who I am now? I'm an addict, I'm a criminal, I don't know, whatever, insert words, right?
Yeah, you definitely take on that identity. And you know, when you're in jail or in prison, it's like you block everything out outside those walls. Like the rest of the world doesn't exist, and this is now your community, and this is now who you are.
Interesting. I want you to talk to her about her transition, because I think this is a good time to get there.
Yeah. Well, there was one thing I was curious about. The first time that you went in and you were so terrified, and then you said you got out and used right away. What was the process there? I mean, did it seem like, well, this was just a fluke that I got arrested, or was it more just, let me get back to what I was doing before to not have to feel anything? What was that?
I think it was a lot to let's go back to where I was so I don't have to feel anything. And there was no accountability for myself, you know, in that point. So, and I also didn't think that I was going to have to go back to jail. You know, there's no reality.
Right.
I wasn't living in my own reality at that time. So anything to go back to the people I was hanging out with, because that's all I knew at that time, I'm going back to the old lifestyle again.
So what was the pivot point for you, would you say, where you said, okay, that's it, I need to finally change the path that I'm on?
The pivot for me was, so after I was released from Department of Corrections, I had, again, went back to the same lifestyle. And
You went back to using again?
I did,
yeah.
yep. And then I went to treatment a few times. And the last time that I went to treatment, I said, you know, I don't want to be defined by my circumstances anymore. I no longer want to live like that. So I listened to what everyone told me to do in treatment, because clearly what I was doing wasn't working. You know, I'd already gone to jail, I'd already gone to prison. This is my second or third rehab. Like, I can't do this anymore. So I think there was a time and a pivot moment for me where it was like I had to accept it. I had to take accountability of my actions. I had to really just seek God. And I remember when I was in treatment and someone said, well, have you prayed? I said, no, I haven't. So I remember I had got down on my knees and I said, I don't know how to do this. So Whatever anyone can do to help me, help me.
This is it. We talked about this last night. That somebody told me a long time ago. The four most powerful words in the English language are "Will you help me?" Mm-hmm. And because if you ask anybody in this room to help you, almost every one of us is going to be there for that other person. And it's strange that way, right? Like, we have a lot of integrity for other people. We just seemingly don't have integrity for ourselves. Yeah. And so that becomes a really important step, I think, in your transformation, is this idea of, I don't know how to do this by myself. Mm-hmm. And I need somebody with a different skill set to get me out of this thing. Mm-hmm. I'm gonna
well, that finally breaks you out of the pattern.
Is that what it is?
Yeah. It finally breaks you out of the pattern of just going back to what you've been doing on autopilot.
Okay. I want to bring up this concept that is the foundation for learn from people who lived it. 4 years ago, I went through my own severe mental health crisis and found myself at a crossroads where the demons from my past were catching up to me. And I knew that I really needed to get and do what you just did. I needed to get with people who knew how to do something different than what I was doing, because it just wasn't working for me. Really physical manifestations, back pain, neck pain, knee pain, like just body breaking down. And I wasn't taking care of myself, if I'm truthful either. But I stepped into this facility and I was working with a couple of different healers. And one guy looked at me and he said, after I'd, kind of poured out my whole story on this thing, he said, you're a transitional character. And I looked back at him with that look in my eye of like, what the hell does that mean?
Yeah. What is that?
And he's like, the Native Americans have this belief that every 7 years somebody is born in the family, and that person is here to end dysfunction and move people forward in their lineage. And this is the progression of the family, right? And then he went on to say that the transitional character's role is to end dysfunction in their own life so that they can make life better for future generations. Mm-hmm. I love the idea of being the transitional character. And I asked Cordero about it last night, and he laughed, and he was like, man, that feels like a heavyweight cape to wear. And my challenge to him was, actually, I think it makes it easier, because at every turn, knowing that I'm that person, my decisions are easier. Yeah. It's like, should I have that hard conversation with somebody that's going to make my life better? I don't want to do that. That's not what the transitional character would do. They'd go right through that conversation because that's their role. Would I start taking care of myself because I'm the Yes, I will. I'll start taking care of myself. Will I start to work on my healing and those demons from my past? Yes, I have to. Mm-hmm. Because this is the only way I can move myself and my family out of dysfunction. And so I'm wondering, as I explain that, does that feel like you?
Yes. Yeah.
Because then you have a very clear sense of purpose at that point.
Right.
That's what it is. Yeah. So in what ways does that feel like you?
So the first part that you were talking about really touched me, because it starts with, I feel like the fear part, right? Fear, that fear really gets a hold of us.
Stops you.
Yeah.
Let's be honest.
Yeah, it does completely.
And so how do you see yourself as this transitional character now?
I'm not the person that I was before.
Yeah, clearly.
And there's a song that I don't walk like I used to, I don't talk like I used to, and it reminds me of myself, because I look at who I am today to who I was then, and I'm not the same person anymore. Yeah. Sometimes see people or family members, and they're like, we don't even recognize you anymore. You're much more calm now. And I said, well, yeah, it's because I have peace. Before, I couldn't be calm because I wasn't at peace with myself, and I was so angry. And now that I'm at peace with myself and my identity and who I am, I can be calm.
So, the other component of the transitional character is the idea of working on the demons. But I want to go back to something really quickly. I think most transitional characters grow up in environments that feel chaotic, that don't feel like they make sense, that feel like they don't fit, that feel like they don't belong. And you don't have to show me your hands, but just in your head, I wonder if you'll think about, like, did your life make sense? Well, there are a lot of points in your life that were just, they didn't make any sense to you. And I tell the story all the time when I'm on the stage about being 12 years old and looking around my house going, what the fuck is going on here? It's like my dad's always drunk, my mom's always screaming, we don't have any money, like everything is no, there's so much anger in our house. And as I said earlier, we had the other stuff too, but nobody's in therapy because they got too many hugs. So we had that thing playing out in my home too, but I vividly remember being a 12-year-old going, what are we doing here? And why can't we get this thing figured out? And why can't, and I spent a lot of time being really angry with my parents too about why can't you guys get your stuff together? Like, I'm the kid over here. Yeah. I shouldn't be the one trying to sort this out for our family, but we ended up doing it. And it seems like you grew up in that chaos too.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so it would be normal, I think, for anybody out here sitting to think for a moment about like, yeah, it was really chaotic. There were a lot of moments that didn't make a lot of sense. Right. Well, that to me is like, that's how you know you're the transitional character. Because you're looking around going, something has to change here. We got to do something different. And she did say something great, Dave, that I want you to kind of double down on, which is you do have to take on a new persona. Yeah. You do have to change, not necessarily everything about you, but you got to change a lot of things about you.
I think the idea of the transitional character, if you have a model in mind of what you want to pass on for your kids, or if you have a model in mind of the type of person that you want to be to a friend or something like that, it kind of takes you out of the immediate circumstances and gives you something to look toward when it comes time to make a decision for something. Yeah. Like, is this consistent with the person that I want to be, or is this basically rehashing the same things from the past again? And having that model, I think, can help because, as I've said before, a lot of what we do is just kind of automatic. You have a pattern, and a lot of these patterns go way back to childhood. As a 12-year-old going through a traumatic situation, you do what you need to do to survive that situation. If it means, figuring out where to find food or what have you, but also the attitudes and the beliefs are also automatic as well. So when you're looking at a situation and trying to make sense of it, it's going to automatically go back to a time in your life where things were chaotic. As you go on, you become an adult, a lot of those patterns start to not fit anymore. So this is a challenge pretty much for everybody, that if you find that there are patterns that don't work anymore, it's okay now with adult eyes to look at it and say, well, what am I doing? Like, why is it that I keep finding myself in these conflicts with people over whatever it is? And is this something that goes back to when I was younger that made sense then with the tools of a 12-year-old, but now as an adult, it just doesn't make sense anymore, and I need to find a different way to do this. I think that's kind of the process, and something like a transition, the idea of a transitional character kind of gives you like a framework or a model to try to set up like what the ideal person is that you'd want to be, and then you start getting closer to it. You start inching your way closer to it.
I want to ask you about, do you want to expand on that a little bit?
Well, I was just going to say they have a saying in recovery that nothing changes if nothing changes.
My favorite expression is, if you want your life to change, you have to change your life. Right? Like, you can't keep doing the same shit. Like, you have to make different choices. Yeah.
But I think what a lot of people struggle with, and especially if you're going through addiction, is those changes are very slow. Those slow. Changes are very slow. And sometimes the immediacy or that feeling of like, I got to do this right now, you're going to end up making a choice that is not consistent with where you want to be 5 or 10 years from now. Right? And so that's where it becomes hard, is to develop that patience of saying, okay, I've been doing these things which people tell me it's going to be, good for me to do, and it's going to end up, helping me in the long run, but I just don't see it. And finding a way to stay consistent with little changes, little positive things each day. It's the little things that add up into something big over time if you just stay with it.
Yeah. I want to ask you about your relationship with your husband. Yeah. You told me on the phone that he struggled with addiction as well. Mm-hmm. So when you guys came to be together, were you both using together?
Yeah, we met. When we did meet, we were both using, active in our addiction.
Was he a heroin addict as well?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
And you also told me on the phone that there was a moment where your husband came to you and he said, enough. Yeah. Give us that story.
So after I was released from prison, I had went back to drugs and alcohol. And at that time, he was still in prison. So when he had got out, I was still using. And he had this fear, that he didn't want to go back to prison and he didn't want to live that life anymore. So it was either I change or he's going to change or he's going to continue to use. So it's, what do we do here? I love you. I got to set boundaries with you. I support you. You've got to get some help, is what he told me. And so it took me a while to think about that. I continued to use for a while, but I didn't want to take him down with me. And I knew at that point, I was headed back to prison if I didn't stop too. And my marriage was important to me. My supports were important to me. The people that cared about me were important to me. So at that time, I decided to go ahead and try it again and took myself to rehab.
What do you think it was about that particular stint that stuck? Was it the fear maybe of losing the relationship? Was that conversation the moment in your life where you went, well, like, oh, I guess he's serious. Mm-hmm. I guess now we got to figure something out here. What was it?
I think it was probably the fear of losing the relationship, but I think it was more that he was one of the only people that I trusted in my life that I knew who was probably telling me the truth.
Okay.
And that's hard to find.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and when I can see where you said, like, I kept using for a little while, like, he was a user too, and so I can imagine, like, who are you to tell me, or who are you to kind of talk to me about getting sober when, you're kind of in the same vein. What did you learn at that final stint in rehab that seemed to stick? There had to have been something, because I really believe this, and I'll let you think about your answer for a second. I really believe this. I really believe everybody in this room is a sequence of words away from life making sense. Somewhere along the way, somebody has said something to us, and we have begun like, that's the smartest thing I've ever heard. I'm going to start doing that, right? Whether it's money or relationships or career advice or something, like there's a sequence of words that we get presented with that changes everything for us. Did somebody say something? Did somebody do something? What was it about that final stint that stuck?
There was a lot of things that stuck in that stint. I had more supports in my life who poured into me, who filled my cup up when it was empty. I had a realization of that this was no longer going to be my identity. I had taken accountability of my actions, but one thing that someone said to me was, you're created for greatness.
There it is.
And I said, wow, and it took me a while to think about that. So
I can imagine that growing up the way that you did, you didn't feel like you deserved greatness.
No, I didn't. I didn't think I deserved anything.
Right.
I thought that's who I was going to be for the rest of my life.
That's a vicious trap, Dave.
That's the old cycle.
It is. It's a vicious cycle, right? Of like, if you don't think you're worth it, why would you do anything different? Right. So, Dave, how do you help people, or how have you helped people in the past love themselves, feel worthy, get to that point where they like, okay, man, I matter enough to make this change.
Right. It's hard to say how people can find that, and I think going through a program several times, seeds were planted. Mm-hmm. You might not have been ready to act on it. You might not have been ready for them to take root.
It's a good point.
Seeds were planted. And kind of the next time you hear it, it's like, okay, I've heard that before, but now maybe the circumstances are different. Now maybe the stakes are higher. Now maybe there's, you ran into somebody else who mattered in your life, right? And so each time you come back around to it, I think the context is different, and maybe it's a little fuller, and it just takes time sometimes for things that you experience to stick. And I think that's the norm. I mean, from my experience dealing with people that have struggled with addiction, relapse happens. And, in fact, we've kind of changed the way that we provide treatment in terms of moving more toward harm reduction, right? The idea that, okay, if you're going to relapse, let's try to keep it brief. Let's try to get back on track again, and not get into a situation where it's like, well, I've tried this, and obviously I can't do it, so the hell with it. I'm just going to go back full throws into addiction. then you lose all the ground that you gain. So at least if you can try to get back to fundamentals as quickly as possible. But I think it just takes time for those seeds to take root.
It's not an overnight thing.
No, never.
No.
Almost never.
I like what you said there about the seeds getting planted. So you're coming out of this rehab stint. It's finally making sense. You've been sober now for 7 years. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Awesome.
What would you tell the 20-year-old version of yourself right now?
That's a good question. I think I would tell my 20-year-old version of myself to learn who I want to be, not what others want me to be.
There it is. Yeah.
Don't look for my identity in somebody else, and know my identity in God.
Yeah, you mentioned it a couple of times. And so faith is obviously a huge part of who you are and what you're about. And before you answer this question, I want to ask you, Dave, you mentioned a few things too, right? You talked about community, you talked about changing your environment. Where does spirituality or faith or a belief in something bigger than yourself fall on the spectrum of things that are really important for recovery?
I think when you're talking about having a relationship with God and bringing faith into the picture, you have value for who you are as a person, not because of what you do, not because of your position in life, not because of who you know, but just for being, just for who you are, you have value.
Yeah.
Right? And coming to that realization, well, if I'm worth something, if I have value, then how am I treating myself? Mm-hmm. Right? What am I doing to myself? And it's like if you owned a Ferrari, would you take it off-road? Would you go tearing through a field and, rip the thing up? I mean, if you have something of value, you want to treat it respectfully and cherish it and give it the place in your life that it deserves. And I think taking that as a concept and then making it into reality, and by that I mean the decisions that you make are in response to the fact that you're valuable. Right? I wouldn't do this to something that's not valuable.
Say that again,
right?
Dave.
So the decisions that you make, the day-to-day decisions that you make are consistent with the fact that you have value. Right? You're showing the value by the choices that you make.
Yeah, it's good right there.
It is good. Somebody else said something to me like, treat yourself like you're the only car you get your whole life. How would you take care of that car? Right, that thing would get oil changes religiously. The minute you heard a little sound, it would be at the shop. But we don't do that for ourselves.
We don't.
Yeah, we bury ourselves down, and we have that thing that I always just pisses me off, which is I'm fine, everything's fine. And it's like you're so far from fine, and I know because your voice just went up 4 octaves when you answered that way, right? So talk to me about you coming to faith. Mm-hmm. What did that surrender look like? Because that's ultimately, I think, what that boils down to. It's like this idea of, I can't do this by myself. I need something bigger than me to help me out.
Yeah. Well, it started off with the first prayer that I had in the rehab, and my husband had also had an encounter with God while he was incarcerated. So we had friends when he got out. We had friends who invited us to church, and I had went to church, and this is the lady, the pastor at the church had called me out, and she had told me that I was created for greatness. And so it really stuck with me. I gave my life to the Lord at that church, and we still go to that church today, but that's kind of where it all started, was surrendering to God and seeds getting planted and people pouring into my cup and having a church family, positive supports in my life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think faith is important too. I think spirituality is important, but I also, I don't believe that it's one size fits all. Like Jesus might not be your homeboy, that's fine. Yeah. Buddha can be your buddy, or it's maybe you're into Islam, or it doesn't matter to me. But I do believe that we all have to land on something bigger than ourselves. We have to feel like there's something moving and shaking up there, and we're not in total control. Because I don't know how you feel about this, and I'd love to hear your perspective on this too. But I try to control a lot of my life. Are you all like that? I try to really make sure that I'm I like to think that I'm orchestrating this thing, but it becomes a lot easier for me when I recognize that I'm not.
Yep.
And that I don't have to control that situation, or I don't have to control that interaction, or I can't control how this person is going to react to me when I have to say something or have to do something. So I'm wondering, how you dealt with giving up control. Still working on it?
Yeah, still working on that one. That's a daily thing that I work on, So, but yeah, because for control for me nowadays is I have control of my actions now, and I have control of my routine, and I have control of my relationship with other people.
Yes.
But like you said, I don't have control what other people think about me. And I think recognizing that I don't have control over those things, I'm okay with. But now I can control those things that I take action on.
Dave and I have this 6-week wellness challenge that we put together, and one of the chapters in there is called "What Did You Expect?" And I think it's kind of a good opportunity to talk about expectations, because we have a lot of expectations for other people. Mm-hmm. And again, getting back to what I said earlier, a lot of us have integrity for other people. We just don't have any integrity for ourselves. And I think a lot of us expect other people to do a lot of things. We sort of let ourselves off the hook, and we do the same things. And so tell me a little bit about why managing your expectations, Dave, is such a critical piece to this puzzle.
There's definitely a piece of this where you get what you're looking for in life. If you're driving out on the road and you're prone to getting angry driving, right? And you get behind the wheel and you say, everybody's driving. There's all assholes out there driving. Everybody's, you're starting to get like wound up and angry already. You're gonna find everybody irritating you driving. And it's just gonna swell up inside of you and kind of create all kinds of a stir. When you have expectations with other people, if you expect other people to treat you badly, you have to go into the store to return something or whatever, and you say, I just expect I'm going to get a hard time with this. What people don't realize is what you put off ends up resonating with other people around you. Mm-hmm. We even have a whole nervous system inside of our body called mirror neurons. And it's almost like if you remember the old telephone modems, like back in the AOL days, for those of you who are old enough to know AOL, right? You dial the number, and then there's a tone on one side and a tone on the other, and then pretty soon everything is hissing and linking up together. We do that with each other, right? So when you meet somebody, they kind of pick up on your vibe, you kind of pick up on their vibe, and there's kind of some meeting in the middle. If you're an angry person and you're going into situations expecting to be treated badly, that negative energy that you put out is going to set people in the wrong way. And where I've seen some interesting things with this, you might be looking for a solution to a problem that you have. Well, the person that you're about to meet may have the answer to that, but if you go into the situation with a really strong, off-putting negative vibe, they're not going to tell you. They might be able to solve your problem. They're just going to keep it quiet. And you'll never know the situation that you missed out on because it was never presented to you. The opposite is also true. I find when people are friendly and outgoing and they try to go out of their way to help other people, and try to solve other people's problems, you might mention something in passing and not even ask the other person to help you with that. And then they volunteer to step up and take care of that situation for you, or to put you in touch with somebody that can help you with it. So it's kind of like just by trying to cultivate a positive attitude and be that light to other people, it brings out in them their desire to help and their desire to see you lifted up as well. Yeah. So it's an interesting dynamic, and like I said, it's not something that people would automatically know. But it's also something that people don't automatically figure out. When you meet these negative people that just think, oh, everybody's against me. I'm sure it seems that way, and you're getting exactly what you're looking for because you're putting that out there, and then that's what's coming back to you from other people.
This is probably why your church community is so meaningful for you, because you know oftentimes you go to church, and anybody that's been to any kind of a place like that, people are typically putting their best self forward. Like, you know, nobody's showing up on Sunday morning flipping people off or, you know, cutting people off. It's like the parking lot's cohesive. People are letting
not until after when they're trying to get out of the parking lot,
for the game. Right? But there is that, right? And there is that when you're amongst these sort of like-minded people, there is this opportunity where I think the energy gets raised in them and in you. I want to ask you about amends. So I say that word, something just came over you as I said that. What do you think about when I say, talk to me about amends for yourself, for other people?
When I think of amends, I think of forgiveness.
Okay.
And unforgiveness.
Okay.
So
Go deeper on forgiveness.
Forgiveness, first, for forgiveness, I had to forgive myself before I could forgive anybody else. So that was the first thing that I needed to do. And forgiving myself, I had to take accountability first and look at of my actions and what was my part in this. What was my part in all these things? And what was my part in hurting other people? And what was my part in all that? So once I was able to forgive myself, I was able to forgive my mom. Right? She was the first person that I needed to forgive. And now I'm able to forgive her, and I'm okay with who she is and what she wants to be, because I'm gonna love her regardless, but I can still have those boundaries. And I'm okay to have those boundaries now.
Yeah, I went through a really hardship with my mom too. We had such a contentious relationship our whole life. And it just got to a point where I had a therapist once recommend, like, you just need to have a custodial relationship with her. And I was like, well, again, I'm getting back to these people saying things. I'm like, what the hell does that mean? And he was like, well, you think about the way a custodian works, right? They go to work, they empty the trash, they mop the floors. Like, there's not this big emotional attachment to it, but they tend to it. They do what needs to be done. And so call your mom, check in with her a couple of times a month and just say hello, ask her if she needs anything. But, you know, you can keep your space and you can keep your boundaries and do what you need to do to kind of work on you and fix you. And then just don't worry about her for a little while. Worry about yourself for a little while.
Well, I think sometimes you have to love from a distance.
Yeah, you're right. There is probably that component to it. But getting back to what you just said about, like, I forgave myself, one of the things I'm thinking about is I'd like to expand more on forgiveness, and I want you to come in on this too a little bit, because what you have to forgive is you have to go, man, like, I forgive that little 12-year-old that was in so much pain. It was her every need was unmet from my mom. My brothers were seemingly angry. Like, I forgive myself for making the choices that I did because I was hurting so much.
Yeah.
And the same thing with your mom, right? Like, eventually, I think there's a lot of validity in getting to that place with the parents or the people that raised us who may have made mistakes and say, like, God, they didn't get it right, but they did the best they could. They loved us. We know that, right? Because they told us, and maybe they didn't show us. But for me, it just feels so incredible to have been able to do the same thing you did, which is not only did I forgive myself, I forgave my mom. Set those things down, because you're carrying the bags.
Yeah.
Like, don't get it twisted. You're carrying the bags with you everywhere you go. And so I'm curious about that moment where you forgave your mom. What came over you?
It's like the heaviness had been lifted.
Okay.
You know, like you're saying, carrying the bags, and it's like you're walking around with all of this resentment and all this trauma that people have done to you or you've done to other people. All of this thing is just carrying with you. And it's like when you release, I forgive myself and I forgive my mom and I forgive those who had caused harm to me or those who have hurt me. It's like that weight, that heaviness had been lifted off of me.
Dave, can you talk a little bit about forgiveness? I mean, it's week 3 in our book, and I think you have a really incredible breakdown on forgiveness. And you have this thing that you call like a full pardon?
There's different types of forgiveness.
Okay, that's what I want to talk about.
Well, with forgiveness, I mean, what people typically think of for forgiveness is somebody does something to you and you just say, well, okay, I forgive you. And then the relationship goes back to where it was before, that you're, on good terms together. I mean, that type of forgiveness I would consider that like a full pardon forgiveness. And but there's other types of forgiveness too. I mean, sometimes you're not able to make amends with somebody. You know, maybe they're not in your life anymore, or maybe they're indifferent, or maybe they're still abusive. You know, and finding a way to forgive somebody that you're not able to reconcile that relationship. There comes a time where you have to find a way to just release it. You know, because the person who did you wrong, if they're not willing to ask for forgiveness, and you're holding that anger inside and holding that resentment inside, who is it hurting? That person's out doing their own thing, and they're probably hurting other people too. And your resentment that you're holding on to does nothing against them. They could care less, right? So really, it's just hurting you inside to hold on to that. The process of forgiveness is difficult, right? Because a lot of times when people try to go down that road, they get stuck with, well, what that person did is not okay, and I can't accept what they did to me. Okay, fine. You don't have to accept what they did, but finding a way to release it and say, you know what, there's nothing we can do to change that situation. We can't rewind the tape and go back. I'm going to choose to just put that aside for now and move on with my life and live well. And people have different ways of doing that. I think taking a spiritual path is a good way to do it. You know, when you look at forgiveness from a Christian standpoint, say, well, look at all that God has done for me. I can certainly let go of this thing that this other person did to me. Yeah. Right? And the burden that is taken off of you when you're able to do that frees you up to be able to do other things, and it expands your heart to be able to, you know, care about other people and be able to love and forgive other people in a way that you weren't before when you were stuck with it. You know, and there's another type of forgiveness too. I call it like the it's not a full pardon, but it's a partial, what did I call it?
Call it a conditional
conditional pardon, right? I couldn't remember the word that I used. So in that situation, somebody does something and, you know, they kind of ask for forgiveness, but you think maybe they were not sincere about it, or they give you a yes, but. It's like, well, you know, I'm sorry I did this, but, you know, you contributed to it too. Okay. You know, in a situation like that, you can offer forgiveness. You can act in the relationship to not further the tensions in the relationship, but you can still also kind of keep an eye out and say, wait, you know, it's almost like being on probation, right? So I'm going to forgive you, but let's see if it happens again. And maybe if it happens again and we're in the same situation now where you're kind of not taking responsibility, kind of trying to pin it on me a bit. You know, people do that sometimes deliberately and manipulatively, right? Maybe that's not a healthy relationship. Maybe it's time to put some distance in there, in the relationship.
As we kind of wind down with you, I want to ask you to offer some advice to this group that's here in front of us today, a group that you serve, you know, kind of day in and day out. And the question that I want to ask you, or what I want to prompt you with, is give these guys a call to action. So you're on the other side of this now, 7 years sober. Now you're giving back. Now you're in service. You seem to have healed your heart a little bit. You seem to have found a way to love yourself again. You've forgiven your mom. I'm guessing things are good with you and your husband.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And do you guys have kids?
We do. We have a 2-year-old.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so, well, then, before I get to that question, I'm going to ask you this question. What is something that this 2-year-old will never see that you had to experience?
Abandonment.
That they will always know somebody's there for them.
Yeah, that somebody loves them. You know, somebody loves them, that somebody cares. And I think it's just being there. You know, like not just being present, but like being there for them.
This is what I mean when I say, like, how can you figure out a way for the worst thing that ever happened to be the best thing that ever happened to you? It's like you felt that abandonment, and that was terrible, and that took you down such a path. But look what's going to happen now. Yeah. As the transitional character, you're going to make sure that people around you don't feel that thing.
Right. That's where the cycle's broken.
That's
it's a
amazing.
deliberate choice. It's not just an accident that's happening.
Yeah.
Right.
So here's your prompt. What is one or two things that you've learned in the last 5 years that would be good for them to know as they are on this journey?
Yeah. Getting positive supports. Not if it's someone from church or if it's in the 12-step community or even with the girls that are here with you in this room, staying connected and getting positive supports, because those are the people that you're going to need when you're having a hard day.
Yeah, and I wonder how you feel about this, and I wonder more importantly how you guys feel about this. Like, I just don't think life's a mistake anymore. I've given up that illusion, right? Why did this group of women get assembled in this room tonight? What is it, Thursday? On a Thursday night at 7 o'clock. Like, why you? So I would get curious about that if I were you. Like, I'd be real curious about, like, why are you sitting next to her? What are you supposed to be in her life? Why are you next to her? What are you supposed to be in her life?
Right.
What is she supposed to be in your life? What is Megan? What are Tracy? Like, what are these? Why are we all here together? If you latch onto this idea that might not be a mistake, now I think we really start to pour into each other a little bit more, and we build that thing that Dave was talking about, which is a real community.
And you also start looking for those opportunities too with other people.
Right.
Like the opportunities to connect, and maybe somebody has the missing piece that you were struggling with, that you were trying to find.
Yeah. Well, what I want to do is, first up, say thank you so much for sharing your story with us.
Thank you for listening. Yeah.
It's important, and the reason that we do this podcast is because I want to help other people feel less alone. And I know that when you hear a story like yours, you see pieces of yourself in Lindsay, and you go, I experienced that. I felt that. And then in that is the power of, like, I'm not alone. Like, somebody else felt this same sting, and, we're going to be okay, is the way that I like to look at that. And so I want to take a quick break. I want to give everybody like 5-10 minutes, just, get a drink, go to the bathroom, do what you need to do. And then Dave and I have curated about a 45-minute workshop that we'd love for you guys to be a part of. Less emphasis on work, okay? So this isn't going to be like, I'm not going to ask you to go too terribly deep tonight, but my goal is to walk you through a couple of exercises that have been incredibly beneficial for me. They've been incredibly beneficial, I think, for Dave and everybody that has come across our path. And so as we wrap up this podcast today and then get into that piece, thank you to Dr. David Lycan. Thank you so much to Lindsay Proulx. Thank you so much to Tracy. Thank you so much to Megan. But most importantly, thank you for sitting out here and listening to us tonight. And any final thoughts that you would like to offer the group before we wrap?
Just like that lady told me, you guys are all created for greatness.
There it is.
So there is a purpose and there is a reason why you guys are all here in this room tonight. So thank you all for coming.
Okay, beautiful.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you guys so much. We'll see you in 5 minutes, okay?
We have 3 goals with Learn from People Who Lived It. 1, to help you feel less alone. 2, encourage you to seek out a coach, a therapist, a church, anyone who can help you get through your journey and find some healing. 3, when you're ready, share your story with us.
Find Learn from People Who Lived It wherever you get podcasts. Search it using all one word. Learn from People Who Lived It.